In Australia, a person at the age of 14 and older is considered criminally responsible for any offence that they commit. But now there are voices pushing for raising the age of criminal responsibility. So is raising the age justified? We're joined now by Dr. Terry Goldsworthy on the phone to answer this question. Dr. Goldsworthy is an Associate Professor in Criminal Justice and Criminology at Bond University. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Tom.
So to begin with some context, currently the minimum age of criminal responsibility can be as low as 10. However, there's the legal term called dolly incapax. So can you talk us through this concept?
Yeah, so 14 and over, you're criminally responsible in Australia and in every state, and children aged 10 to 13 are not criminally responsible under what we call the dolly incapax presumption, which says that children aren't held responsible unless it can be shown that the child had the capacity to know that they ought not to commit the offence. So that places an onus on the prosecution to show that the child knew their actions were seriously wrong rather than just perhaps naughty or mischievous. So there is an inbuilt protection already in the legal system that forces the prosecution to show that a child of 10 to 13 who is charged with a criminal offence must have known what they were doing was seriously wrong.
And so how is this momentum around the discussions of raising the age of criminal responsibility gained momentum?
Yeah, look, there's a campaign called Raise the Age and some other affiliated groups, and the basic argument being put out by those groups is that we need to get kids aged 10 out of jail. They're being locked up, thrown before the courts, that they should be out there playing in classrooms, not in handcuffs, etc. And it's a rather, facetious argument. If you look at the issues, there's three separate issues. One is, should we hold children criminally responsible in those age groups for crimes they commit, and if so, how? Do the children understand the consequences, which is a separate issue? And then how should we punish the children? What is the penalty outcome? What we're seeing is that the argument has just been centred solely around that children aged 10 to 13 are going to jail. And that is not the case at all in Australia. If you look at the data, it clearly tells us that since 2017, we've had a 35% reduction in the amount of 10 and 13-year-olds being held in custody. And custody can be for pre-sentence or after they get sentenced. So if you look at 10-year-olds, for instance, the data nationally in Australia tells us that less than one 10-year-old is held in custody on any given day in Australia. So for 11-year-olds, it's less than two. So we don't have hundreds of 10 to 13-year-olds sitting in jail every day in Australia. It's just a misnomer when that's put forward.
And so what do you see as some of the issues against raising the criminal age?
Well, I think the basic one is that, whilst there's a presumption there, anyone who's dealt with 10-year-olds and up would know that they have some concept of right and wrong. The argument from Raise the Age is that children are still learning right from wrong. Well, I would disagree with that. Most of the evidence would suggest that the child does have a basic understanding of what is right and wrong. What they may not understand is the consequences, and that is a separate issue, as I've outlined. So I think, if you look at some of the crimes that have occurred, the issue of James Bolger, the 2-year-old who was attacked and killed by two 10-year-olds, there are crimes that we need to hold children accountable for. And by and large, most children who enter the justice system enter it once and then leave and never come back. And jail, in terms of an outcome, is a very, very remote outcome. National data told us that the children court outcomes, I think about 2% received a custodial sentence in 2021. So, very small numbers are getting custodial sentences, and those custodial sentences have declined dramatically in terms of the number since 2010 through to 2021. So we're actually putting less and less and less children in custody. I think we need to make sure that children are responsible for their actions. The crime will not stop necessarily. Just because you say someone's not responsible doesn't mean that they will then stop that activity. So the issue of victims has been largely ignored by these groups. And if you have a look at their campaign site, which is very slick for raising the age, it's got a lot of talking points and how you respond to questions on there, etc. There's hardly a mention of what victims are going to get out of this.
We're speaking with Dr. Terry Goldsworthy, law expert from Bond University, about the implications of raising the age of criminal responsibility in Australia. And Terry, what would be the impact of raising the criminal age?
Well, if we raise the age of criminal responsibility, any child who's 10 to 13 won't be held accountable. The other issue is that it won't address any of the causative issues around why crime is committed. And, youth crime is quite complex. The Queensland Attorney General recognised that when she opposed a bill this year to raise the age to 14 in Queensland. When you're looking at those causative factors, you're talking about risk and protective factors, things like children being affected by domestic violence, mental health issues, disengaged from education, not having suitable parenting or accommodation. Now, those things can be dealt with proper resources and funding. You don't need to remove criminal responsibility to deal with those issues. And that seems to be one of the straw man arguments raised by the Raise the Age group, that you can only deal with these issues through counselling, through supportive services if you raise the age of criminal responsibility. And that is simply a fallacy.
And you have mentioned that crime stats have been dropping in recent years. What do you think could be done to continue to reduce crime stats?
Well, the number of children going to custodial centres is declining. And look, I think if you look at the other options that are available, in Queensland, for instance, if you have a look at the kind of outcomes that were coming for children, they involve things such as, youth justicing, cautions, diversions, etc. So overall in Australia, crime has been decreasing in general. Queensland have had a reverse of that trend. Our crime has been going up. But I think, what we do know, in Queensland at least, is that there's a hard core of juvenile offenders. Up here, 10% of the juvenile offenders commit 50% of the crime. Those are the children who would most likely, if anyone, get a custodial sentence. So you're not going to get a child getting a custodial sentence for stealing a packet of lollies out of a Woolworths store. That kind of misnomer is often bandied about. So, we need to be able to deal with those children who are hardcore offenders. We need to make sure the resources for dealing with the complex issues around youth crime are in place. And perhaps that's what we need to focus on, putting more money into those resources rather than tinkering with the legal system, which up now has worked quite well.
Very, very much appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thanks, Tom.
Dr. Terry Goldsworthy there, law expert from Bond University, speaking about the implications of raising the age of criminal responsibility here in Australia.